Mr.
Ciao.
Rainwater. Oh, yep. It's your
What if
topic,
I started it?
so caught me off guard. I'm just in the habit of doing it. Go
I know.
for it.
Well, because you asked me to pick the topic, so I was like, well, what if I went first this time? Zhao, I have some thoughts about something that you're about to do a lot of, which is rehearsing.
Yes.
And I had a conversation with friends of the show, Matt and Aaron, recently about this because I, for the longest time, have had this hang up about this idea of like repeating myself, kind of saying the same things over and over again. I don't like the idea of like, if I say something, it doesn't sound like it's an original, authentic thought coming out of the moment.
Yep.
And I've been watching a podcast. I say recently, for a while now, called Kill Tony, and it's like a comedy podcast, and it's essentially like an open mic style show. And the idea is like they pull from a bucket, and from the bucket they pull out people who want to do like 1 minute of stand up. And by watching the show, I have been able to kind of understand the creative process that takes place in stand up comedy.
Mm-hmm.
To an extent, right? Insofar as you can from just like seeing people do 1 minute, you know. I mean, it's a really interesting process because ultimately you want to kind of come up with like as much material as you can to talk about and repeat it, right? Like a joke is something you repeat, but you find variations or ways to improvise it, or like new ways to say the same thing but in a better way. Well, anyway, in order to do that, you have to rehearse it, right? You have to practice it. You have to, like, people who play music have to do this, right? Where they just play a song over and over and over and over again. And it's probably even more complicated than like something like stand-up comedy, because like you've got to time it with other people. So like you have to be so in sync with each other,
Right.
like you can't mess up. And to me, that's like so much of rehearsal, from how I understand it, seems to be this concept of you make it such that the material is in the back of your mind. It's not even in the back of your mind. It's just like free to access in a moment's notice. And I'm curious for you, as like somebody who is about to go through the process of, you're directing the movie too, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Of directing and doing, executively producing a whole film, and you having also experienced yourself in regards to like that part of the filmmaking process, like with acting. But I'm sure also to a certain extent, like the whole crew rehearses together, right? Not just the actors.
No, it's just the actors and me.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, okay. Well,
And that's typical too. That's not just like my style. It's typical for, I mean, don't get me wrong. So, I mean, obviously we're going to do a run through when we're on set, you know what I mean? And in this particular instance, I'm actually going to end up being camera as well. So I already kind of know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? In terms of,
well, you wrote the script, so
well, I know,
you
but
have an idea, but
in terms of like how where the camera's going to be, where it's going to move.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the editor as well, so I know when something is going to cut. So I know which parts, you know what I mean? Like people are going to be like, "Oh, I have to go through the whole motion. We have to do the whole scene from this angle." And I'll be like, "No. This shot's only getting cut to when the guy's head explodes." You know, like there's no point in covering it from this angle at any other point in the scene,
right?
Because each shot is saying something different. Like at certain moments in the scene, the power dynamics are different, so the angle is going to be different, and we're going to change the angle when the power dynamic changes because that's how we emphasize. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it goes a step beyond just knowing what the script is, but by knowing what the camera moves are, what the editing is going to be. Chances are I'm going to be doing post-production sound design as well, so I'm going to know there's going to be a sound effect here. You know what I mean? Like all those things in my mind are already worked out. So by doing that, I don't really need anybody else there. There is something most of the time when you're doing pre-production on a film called a tech scout, where that's kind of rehearsal for the crew.
Yeah.
Where the department heads mostly go to the location and they check it out before they get there. And they do it at the theoretically, the time of day that they're going to be shooting at. And they're going to be like, okay, the sun is here. We're going to need to block out this window.
Yeah.
The sound guy is like, okay, there's a train station, you know, 1.5 miles from here. I got to look at the train schedule because if there's going to be trains coming in and out that day, blowing horns, making noise, like I'm going to have to maybe put up a sound blanket. You know what I mean? Like, so that's their rehearsal in a way where they just kind of go and they observe the circumstances in which it is. And they'll ask questions, you know, oh, are we going to be shooting this direction or that direction and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah. Did I answer your question? I don't know
that
if
does answer my question. The Tech Scout thing, that's what it's called? Tech Scout?
It's a tech scout, yeah. And
Scout.
you do it for almost every time you're changing a location, and you do that before you even get on set. If you're doing it correctly. A lot of independent films don't do that, but
that was something I was wondering in that moment, because to me it seemed like it would make sense for the rest of the filming crew to have an idea of how everything, like how the layout of the entire space is. But so in regards to like the actors that you're going to be working with, like for you as a director, like what are you thinking about in terms of what you're looking at and looking for in the rehearsal? Because I'm assuming these are people you've already casted, so you have an idea like what to expect to some degree from them, but like you have to basically do a certain amount of molding in this phase, right?
Molding is not the correct word. So, and this is just, I guess I only want to speak for myself in terms of a directing style. There's a lot of directors who are very much, they micromanage. And you know what I mean? It's, I see this up here and that's what I'm going to see on here.
Right.
I'm doing like air quotes for the screen thing, like for those of you who are listening. That's like one of the worst things, in my opinion, that a director can do is try to take what they see in their head and put it exactly on screen. A lot of people go, oh, that's my vision. That's bullshit. That is just your imagination running wild. Now, to some extent, there are things you can pull from that. But if you become dedicated to that, you're going to be disappointed with your film.
Sure.
It's not going to be that. Like it's literally not going to be that. We've talked about this in the past about filmmaking as the ultimate collaborative art, right? Because there's all these other artists that are doing it. Me, if I wanted to be a Nazi and make sure everybody did exactly what I wanted them to do, I need to fucking pay them. You know what I mean? Like that's what they're getting out of this. You're getting paid to do exactly what I tell you to do. These people are not. These are all volunteer actors, crew, etc. So it's my job to let them do their thing and shine. Now that said, I also need to make sure I'm wrangling the cats to make sure that they're staying inside the fence. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like if they're going way too far out of line, it's just going to be disruptive to all of us. It's going to tank the entire project. That's kind of my job. On the second note, it's boring to me to manipulate people to try to get them to do what's going on in my head exactly. And I like to, so like my process very much so when we start rehearsal, when we did Digits, we didn't have rehearsal. But on this film, we're doing rehearsals because there's a lot of long monologues. My process is always to let the actor go first. And what I mean by that is I don't give them direction. Okay. And I just want to see what they bring and see, because the idea to me is both it's good for them because they get to contribute and possibly bring something that I missed, either subconsciously or just didn't refuse to acknowledge. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things that other people can bring, artists especially. And if they're volunteering, you know they fucking love doing this. You know what I mean? It's not like it's just a paycheck to them. It's something they have a passion and an interest in. Yeah. So I like to let them kind of bring what they're bringing first. And then I kind of take a look at it. And I kind of say, all right, we can keep this. That's going too far. The audience isn't going to understand this. Da, 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 da. That's my other thing. When I look at it, I'm going to look at it from the eyes of the audience. So I am going to say to them, I'm going to be like, what are you trying to do in this moment? Like asking them straight up, like, what's your objective for the character here? And whatever their answer is, I'm going to respond to that with, that's not how I interpreted it as the audience member that's watching, or I am going to correct them in a way. So that there's a difference between manipulating and correcting. The number one goal for me in rehearsal, to go to the core of what you were asking, is to make sure all of us understand the point. You know what I mean? So I talk a lot on this podcast about the thematic premise.
Yeah.
I always go back to that. I always look to that. And instead of manipulating people to do exactly what I want them to do, I want them to look at what we are trying to create and get there in their way that does it, because that's going to create a thing. So for those of you who haven't listened to a couple of the past episodes, I'm doing a short film called Madison's Way. And in this film, several guy friends who have been friend zoned trick this girl into going to a party, but it's not a party. It's more like an intervention style suicide pact where she has to pick one of them to be her boyfriend or they're all going to kill themselves. And she is like, and they like have a gun and all this kind of stuff. So they're kind of holding her hostage in a way by threatening themselves. It's a really interesting, not convoluted, but what's the word I'm looking for here?
It's a deranged sort of.
It's a deranged, interesting kind of a premise. But anyway,
like it. I like the premise though. It's a very it stuck with me since you talked about it, because like, oh, that is pretty fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was unique and it was interesting to me and it spoke to me and I felt like I could relate. So I've been talking to the actors, right? They've wanted one-on-ones with me and they're trying to work out all their backstory and all this stuff. And a lot of it's just masturbatory. It's fine. I'm not judging them. All actors do this. If it helps their process, I'm happy to do it. Me, as someone who has acted in the past, I don't need that a lot of times. Like, I just look at the script and I'm like, okay, this is what I got to do. But one of the things that I had to correct the actors, and more than one of them. So I give you that premise for a reason. When you hear that premise, everybody automatically assumes, well, the girl is the hero and the guys are antagonists, right?
Right.
So I'm getting questions from the actors. I'm like, where they're like, oh, why is he so evil? Why is he so deranged? Blah, 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 blah. And I have to stop them and I have to correct them. I'm like, no, do not judge your character. If you do that, we're fucked. You know what I mean? Like, you have to look at this guy from his point of view and say, I'm the hero of this story. It may be called Madison's Way. Forget that. This is, David's story. David wins her heart. That's the new title of the movie. Think of it like that. You know what I mean? And approach everything you're doing like you are a hero in this instance. And now suddenly that performance becomes different. It doesn't become so sinister and da-da-da-da. What it becomes is authentic, because everybody in any situation that they've ever faced in their life has never said, oh, I'm the bad guy here. Yeah. They're saying, no, I'm doing the right thing, or I'm doing the best I can, or whatever like that. So what I have to do is a lot of times is kind of pivot actors to get in line with what an authentic performance is, and then also stay thematically within that. So as long as they're thinking, okay, now I'm the hero. All right, why does the hero do this then? And then we kind of work on it from there. And you know what I mean? And we build from there. And the reason that the rehearsal becomes important is because when we're on set, we don't have fucking time. Do you know what I mean? So like rehearsals right now, I have maybe 3 of the actors that are going to be there out of the total of 5. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to work with those 3 on the scenes that matter most for those 3. And then when I get the other 2 in there, I'm going to be working with them a little bit more so that when we're on set, we got it.
How many rehearsals are you going to do before screening or before filming?
Hopefully at least 3. if not more, depends on the availability of my actors.
Yeah.
There's a possibility that I may not have a rehearsal with one of the actors. We still haven't casted all the roles. There's 5 roles total, and we have 4 out of the 5 cast. One of them I'm a little apprehensive about because I don't know if the particular actor is going to give a performance within the range of the theme that we're trying to execute. And it's not that's just that. I don't know if he's capable or willing to change to acquiesce to that. You know what I mean? If you have a very bullheaded person on the team, I don't even want to say the actors, just the team in general, that the director feels is out of line from what we're all trying to accomplish, you might have to go a different way. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to let somebody go, but if that becomes the case, that might be what it is. So it's my goal to get the actors that I'm comfortable or confident in as ready as they can.
Right.
So you talked about like the practicing. I know I'm ranting here. I'm not even.
No, this is really interesting to me. I mean, this is why I thought this was an interesting topic to bring up, because I feel like this is, to me, it seems like within film, it's probably one of the most important parts of the process, because I mean, when it comes to the filming part, it almost seems like at that point you're just following the blueprints and the recipe and making sure that you get as much material as you can within that set amount of time. And then at that point, it's up to post-production to, like, you know, make it work out, basically.
True. I mean, there's a lot to be said about how you were describing before about practicing for musical performance. The idea of rehearsal and getting off book, which is, you know, memorizing all your lines and everything, that is done so that you know it, but then you can forget it and live in the moment. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So like a lot of the actors, I already told them, I gave them this heads up, and they were very surprised when I told them this. I was like, one of the first rehearsal exercises we're going to do is we are going to play the scene without dialogue. And they were very confused about that. And I was trying to explain to them, I'm like, listen, your performance is more than what you say. It's about what you do. So we need to emphasize what you know what I mean? Like, I could say.
So, I mean, is it like you're saying like it's a body language specific performance?
It's and not just so much body language, but like how your eyes move.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you'd consider that body language, but like your how you emote through your eyes and stuff like that. Yeah. Whether or not there are props in your hand or in the room, or do you know what I mean? Like, there's a whole ton of things that you can do that emphasize your character. And I don't want them thinking about, oh, I have to deliver this line like this. Mm-hmm. No, I want them thinking about what am I really saying here? You know what I mean? You can say something or it could be the same line of dialogue. It could be, Rainwater, I like your hair, right? And I can say it, Rainwater, I like your hair. Or, Rainwater, I like your hair. Rainwater. Good hair. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a dozen different ways you could say it. You could say, Rainwater, you got a haircut? Rainwater, you got a haircut? Like, you know what I mean? And the way your body moves can really emphasize that, where that line can go a dozen different ways. Yeah. So I wanted them to not focus on saying things like, oh, Madison, I love you. Well, what is he really saying here? Madison, I fucking love you. Madison, I love you. Like, you know, there's a bajillion different ways to play it. And if they're just saying the line, the audience doesn't understand what's happening because the actor doesn't understand what's happening. So that goes back to the rehearsal thing. They need to understand what the scene is about, what their character is about, what the movie is about. And once we can all get on that page, because it's ironic, and this is something that you might not understand as a writer, from writer to writer, me to you, you think in your head, I write this right? I write a script or I write
Yeah.
a comic or whatever, the outline of the story. I give it to someone and they say they like it, they're energized by it, blah, 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 blah. And you think, wow, they got it. They understood what I was saying. The fuck they did.
Right.
Because
No,
I
that's true.
have people who tell me, oh, I love your writing, blah, 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 blah. And then I start explaining to them or directing them. And I'm like, oh, you know, play this scene like you're a cop on a stakeout. Oh, I didn't think about it. And you know what I mean? Like they completely did not see that story in their head
Yeah.
when they did. So that's really what the job of the director is to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. And then it starts illuminating them. Before you know it, once you kind of get down like the overall spine, right? They all start kind of automatically vibing. So like the spine is the actor's super objective. Now let me explain that to anyone who doesn't understand what that is. Super objective and spine are the same exact thing. In every scene, the character wants something. I'm sure everybody who's studied characterization and storytelling understands that. The super objective or the spine is what they want the entire time of the piece, the story.
Right.
So in one scene, he may want a donut. Okay. In the next scene, oh, he wants to get the money. In the next scene after that, oh, he wants her to get her take her clothes off. Like those are individual scene objectives, and those are important. But overall, what does he want? What does his character want the entire time? A good example of that would be The Godfather, right? Let me ask you this. What do you think is the objective, or the spine, I should say, of Michael Corleone?
I feel like I feel like I need to watch the movie a couple more times before I give a good answer to that question. But I think the most hip shot answer I have right now is that Michael Corleone is basically just trying to keep everything within his life together. Starting from starting from his childhood, he's trying to keep it together and as best as he can. But because he's also like a person that does to some extent have ambition, it kind of gets in the way of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like he is on some level a family man, but his way of doing it is kind of rebellious to the ways of his dad, because his dad is more, in his own way, more capable of keeping things together, if that makes sense.
Okay. So if you were the actor and I was the director and we were making The Godfather,
Mm-hmm.
and you gave that to me as your spine, my response would be that keeping it together is a very vague answer. It's
Sure.
not very pointed. It's not directed in towards of like how do I apply that to this scene or that moment or this line of dialogue. Like it's not very, it doesn't inform the choices every time something happens or is said.
Yeah.
The argument I would make, Michael Corleone's spine is to make his father proud.
Yeah. I get what you're saying
So
there.
when he joins the army, he's doing it to make his father proud.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying what I'm trying to say, for sure.
After his brother is killed, he takes over the family business to make his father proud. You know what I mean? Like his goals change from I'm going to be a military guy, I'm going to be a family man and marry this wonderful, American girl and raise a family and I'll make my dad proud, I'll be a senator, I'll be the president, whatever. And then he decides, oh, I'm going to be the head of the mob. I'm going to murder this fucking guy for what he did to my brother. I'm going to da-da-da-da-da. But the one thing that does not change the entire time, how do I make my dad proud?
Right.
So you can look at and examine the entire screenplay, the entire story, whatever it may be, and you apply that to it as an actor. And that fills in so many blanks and questions about it. So right now I have a notebook that I have a spine for every single character. And when I get in the rehearsal, I'm going to be talking to them about them. I'll be like, what do you think the overall goal is for Madison? What do you think she wants out of this? What do you think her real goal is? Obviously she wants to get out of this and she wants none of these guys to hurt themselves and all that kind of stuff. But what does she really want? What can really inform everything that she does? And I have an answer for that. And it's good to prepare that, because when we're on set, long before we're on set, I give that spine to the actress beforehand. She has a couple of weeks to go through the script and go and ask herself those questions, as opposed to being on the set where the crew is waiting, the clock is ticking, the food is getting cold. You know what I mean? Like, she has time to create that performance in her book, in her script, write notes, come up with ideas about, oh, well, Madison really wants this, so maybe I should perform this like this, and
Yeah.
And that really starts helping actors to all get on the same page. And if you're a good enough director, you pit some of those things against each other so they bounce. And I'm not talking about just one of the guys versus Madison. I'm talking about one of the guys versus one of the other guys. How, you know what I mean? Like the guys in the thing have very, I don't want to say minimal, but the interactions between the guys themselves are obviously much less than they are one-on-one to Madison. But they are there. So when I tell the actors, don't judge your character, I want them to judge the other characters like a motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like that I want them to do. I want them to look at Madison like she's the fucking villain. I want them to look at the other guy like, this guy's pathetic. What the fuck is he even here? Like, these kinds of interactions will inform real character. And that can all come from the spine. That's like the biggest homework.
That's
job.
a super useful writing tool. And it's interesting because I've only recently become aware of that in characters. Like the way I've been writing Trailer Park Warlock, I suddenly slowly became aware of like what all the particular characters' spines were after looking at the way I'd been writing them, which is really weird because it's like, you know, it's not like there was another person writing and I'm interpreting it. It's like literally it was just me, and I'm just like kind of picking up the patterns that I set up along the way. And that's going to be really helpful going into whatever I write afterwards, because it is something that I think having earlier on in a story, I like the way that you're talking about it, because it's like it gives a holistic sense to the entire script, into the whole medium as a thing, you know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of stuck on thinking about the spine, but I know we're talking about rehearsal, so I'll try.
No, it's part of it. It's part of it. So if you have questions, feel free to ask, because it's actually me answering your questions right now is helping me making sure I'm
good, solid
in what I'm doing.
No, you're doing a good job of educating on that, because like I said, I mean, all of that ultimately resonates with theme, right? Yes. You want to, like, I like the way that you're approaching it, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to make everything within the film resonate with each other so that it feels coherent, feels cohesive. And so basically you're doing sort of that job of maybe a producer would with a band, where you're making sure everybody is synced up and synchronized and going like, okay, you're on time. Like all of y'all are on time. Y'all are all within, like you said, I like the way you put it. Everybody understands the point of the story together. And so in so doing, everybody, like nothing feels off, right? When you go to film. So in regards to that, like, it does kind of sound like rehearsal is almost like class, like you're teaching them in some sense. Yeah, which is interesting to think about. Because I don't know. I think previously I thought of rehearsal almost in the sense of, I don't know, not in a class sense. I guess that's like not in the sense of like this is a classroom everybody's going into, and there's a teacher, right? Like teaching everybody the script, basically. But that seems like that's basically what you're doing.
Well, one of the things that I learned in college, and I relearned when I went through a couple of my directing books, and also my acting books, because I didn't just go through the directing books. I looked at my acting books too, because it's important for a director to sit in those shoes. And you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of direction that people can throw out where it's just like, oh, can you make this more sexy? And the actor might be sitting there going, thinking to themselves, I was already playing it sexy. Is this that? Oh, I don't know what he wants. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's not playable direction. It's important for me to know that. So like I'm studying those books as well. But in line with what you're talking about with the classroom thing, it's very, very important for me. And this is what's counterintuitive about directing. Instead of giving pointed statements for people, and this goes back to our discussion that we just had about spine, ask questions to the actors. So like I asked you, what do you think Michael Corleone, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that got you turning. Now I was pointing you in a direction there. I was directing you through a question.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like how when you want an audience not to get ahead, but you want to lead them, right? You want them to follow. So you want to ask questions. You want them engaged. You want them living in the moment. So it's very important. And that's what a teacher does in class, right? They ask questions to the students and they always know where they're going. You know, this is the lesson that we're talking about today, but I know the answers, but I want you to discover them. I want you to come about them. I want you to create them. So it's important to ask the question as opposed to just giving people the answer, because they're not going to learn. They're not going to remember. They're not going to enjoy it. You know what I mean? Like, so asking questions becomes a key part of directing and rehearsal. You know what I mean? Asking those questions, letting people have the time between now and filming to think about what their answer is or possible answers. That's the thing about directing and like bringing stuff to life and acting. There's multiple choices that you can make to serve every single thing. And what you have to do as an actor is decide which one you want to play and why. And the best way to do that is to just give a question like a teacher would.
So have there been film shoots where going into it, you felt unsure as to whether or not your actors had all the tools they needed before filming?
Well, the only thing that I directed was digits. I'm trying to think of what I've directed before since that. Because I mean, we did some comedy things, but that wasn't, it was all, some of it was just improvisation and things like that. There have been times, so there were times on digits. We'll just talk about digits because I can remember that pretty vividly. Yeah. Like I talked about my process where I would come in after the actor did what they were going to do. Now I'm going to blame myself, and it's going to sound like I'm disparaging some of the actors, but I'm not. I was not as sharp about my directing, how to direct when I was on digits. I still had a process, but in terms, I was giving very result-oriented direction, which was, this is what I see in my head, this is what I want you to do, and this is what it's going to look like on screen. Blah, 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 blah. That was bullshit, and I wasn't doing it right. Yeah. But there were times when I was explaining to actors on digits where I was doing the right things. Like I was pointing out things. I noticed something on digits that if the person was giving a performance that was false, the first thing that I could do, or the number one thing that I remember doing that got them exactly where I needed them to be, was pointing out a fact about something that had happened earlier in the script. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I want to play it like this. And I'm like, no. Remember in that scene where we did the thing? You did it like this. You said this, or your character did that. So that should resonate here, right? Yeah. And they were like, oh, I see what you're saying. And then they did it exactly the way that I was hoping that they would do it. And it was an easier way to communicate with them. There were other times when I wasn't giving the right direction, and I just had to say in my head, well, I can cut there and I can cut to this. All right, I'll shoot it this way, because the actor just wasn't giving me what I wanted. Yeah. Now, when you're talking about not being prepared right now, there's an actor that I talked about earlier that's attached that I'm not sure if they're going to be malleable to the rest of the team's efforts, the point, the theme, whatever you want to call it. Right now, I'm not making any decisions with that. I'm not going to judge my actor because I've seen their work. I know that they're a capable and competent actor. I want to be open and I want to see what they bring.
Yeah.
I also want to see how it works with the other actors. Right? Because maybe it does work. Maybe they're seeing something I'm not. Am I worried? Yes. Am I preparing? Am I preparing for having to let that person go? Yes. Am I preparing to argue with that person? Argue is a strong word. I would say negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You know what I'm saying? So like there's trepidation definitely that gets attached to rehearsals, but that's one of the great things about rehearsals is if it doesn't work out in rehearsal, I can go another way. Yeah. And we haven't dragged everybody on set and spent thousands of dollars and we're stuck with it. You know what I'm saying? Like we still have that opportunity. So there's times when it does happen and it's never going to be perfect. You're never always going to get exactly what you want, but you also have to make sure that the rest of the team is carrying their weight, I guess is the thing.
Gotcha.
If that answers your question. I don't know if I answered it.
That does answer my question. Because to me, I think about, I guess I think about being in your seat and I wonder like, oh, what would I have to improvise, right? Within filming, right? Because at some point, I'm sure you come across situations where it's like, okay, this isn't quite working how I want it to. I need to, if I can't get what I want out of a particular actor, I need to find some sort of way to at least make it work out ultimately, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Right. That's no. That's, I mean, that's the thing is like, so when I do my script breakdown as a director, if I want the actor to pout, right? Like I want them to pout, the right direction that would be okay. Ask this question like a 6-year-old who just got yelled at is asking if they can go play a video game.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to, can I go and play my Xbox? Like, you know what I mean? Like, but they're going to give whatever the dialogue is. But say they take it a different direction and they say, can I go play my Xbox? Like they're not pouting. They're more so like whining in that instance. If the only thing that I said was play it like a toddler who just got yelled at, and that's their reaction, then I have to adjust as a director.
Yeah,
so
right.
So part of my homework is not just writing that one direction down and saying that's the way I have to direct it. It's looking at it like, okay, what's another way I can get a pout out of somebody? You know what I mean? Like there's got to be another way I can paint that picture for them where it's like, okay, make them feel bad for yelling at you. Can I? And then you get the pout and it's like, boom, that was the direction this actor needed.
I mean, I'm hearing you describe this process and I'm thinking in terms of like bigger production film shoots. Like I imagine directors must get really into the heads of like the actors in order to like find the cues, you know what I mean?
There's a relationship that has to form.
Yeah.
You have to get to know that person's style. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure Johnny Depp and Tim Burton have a shorthand by this point. You know what I mean?
Right.
Johnny, like Tim Burton knows, he says, hey, Johnny, can you say blah, 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 like a crocodile with a beige hat on? Yeah. And Johnny's like, I know what you mean, Tim. The rest of the crew, if they're new or something, like the new PA is like, what the fuck's he talking about? A crocodile and a beige hat. But Johnny and Tim know what that means.
Sure.
And you know what I mean? But so like every time you work with a new actor or someone you're not friends with, like when I worked with on Digits, I knew a fair amount of those people ahead of time. And I knew the kinds of things I had to say to certain people to get what I wanted from them. Other ones I had to find out. You know what I mean? Like I had to kind of discover and grow. And yes, that can be laborious. That can be frustrating. But at the same time, that's also kind of what's fun is getting to know those people. And that's why a good director is much like a good actor. They listen. That's like the number one thing is like, you got to listen. So if I pay attention to, this is what I said to you, this is what you said back, and then this is how you performed, I can start figuring you out. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
I could be like, okay, that's not what I need to say to him. I need to say this. And then you get to that. And then you start kind of carrying that on and you form a relationship and you figure it out. And that's what it is. It's the same thing when I talk to like a director of photography. I could say, you know, oh, we should really do the sweeping shot or whatever like that. Well, what the fuck does sweeping mean to me? That it might mean something different to him. Like I may be like this like slow boom up and it's very, you know, majestic, whatever. And he hears sweeping and he thinks it's like a whip pan.
Right. Like it's a much faster process. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that idea of you have to kind of work on the communication styles of somebody. And then the more you work with them, the more you figure it out and the more you get on the same page. And then you start realizing this person's not my style. This person is my style. I'm going to work with that person again. Like that's kind of how you form that crew. So like Christopher Nolan has like a very, you know,
Martin
crew that he uses all the
Scorsese.
time. Martin Scorsese. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very much that searching for your people type of situation. And it's not easy to do, but if you're dedicated to it, you can make it work.
Yeah, that's interesting because like I'm thinking about that looking at a director like Tarantino who actually like in comparison actually changes out casts a lot with the exception to maybe like Samuel L. Jackson who appears in a fair number of his movies, right? But like beyond that, like I mean most movies like he has a pretty diverse cast from movie to movie.
Yeah, he reuses some people here and there, but the people that he uses as main actors in a lot of his films, he'll use as smaller supporting in other things.
That's true.
Which is a smart thing to do because then you can focus your time into developing the relationship with that new actor.
Yeah.
And that shorthand with the one that you already know makes it easy and you really don't have to focus. Like you know what they're going to do and you can help them along and it's very easy and not as time consuming. So that's a good way to grow and develop a network, you know?
I had for a long time kind of assumed that a lot of it was not so like for directors who reuse casts. A lot of times I'd assume a lot of it might have had just been like they're just buddies or whatever. Like it's more of a fraternal, like, you know.
It could be that does exist.
But you know, the other aspect of that where it's like, well, it's just easier because I know this person understands. We both understand how this works, how we work together, and there's less friction within production, basically. Like I would imagine at a certain point you want to be in a place where you minimize friction in production as much as possible and you do whatever you can, right? Especially if you're dealing with like maybe your movie has a much smaller budget. So like if you have a smaller budget, try and find as much of the crew as you can that you've worked with before so that you don't have to worry about those problems when you get into the production period. Well, I mean,
you talk about the path of least resistance in terms of frustration, but also at the same time, you also have a goal of enjoying your work. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to go to work and have a good time. So it's like, I had a good time working with that guy. I want to work with him again.
Yeah.
Or I know he's capable of this, or I know he needs a paycheck. And I have this idea for a character and he's already the person in my mind playing that character. You know what I mean? Like, all those things kind of factor in. So, I mean, it's one of those things where people just, you know, and most of the time I think it's because there's a trust, right?
Yeah.
If you know in your artist heart, someone can do this, that gives you more confidence that you're going to get what you want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you may or may not. It's really sometimes it's a gamble, but there's a confidence, and I think a lot of artists, doesn't matter if you're a director or a writer, or artist, whatever. If you know you have a very good shot of pulling off what you're trying to accomplish, you're gonna take it, right? I mean, there's no reason not to. So when you have that kind of trust with somebody, whether it be a crew member or a cast member, there's always that, not inspiration, but motivation to reach for what you want and use the things that you know, the tools, not that I'm calling people tools, but the tools that can help you get it. It's just, it's that simple.
For sure. I mean, the more that I've listened, the more that I've learned about that process, and the more that you've talked about it, and maybe I've said this before in a previous podcast, but like, there is an almost like, especially when you get into the wider crew, right? There's almost like a, like construction crew sort of format to it, in the same way that like in comics, there is what's called the factory setup, right? So you have somebody who is the penciler. They're kind of the main director, and they're kind of the director and the actors all in one, right? And they work with the writer, and the penciler basically is like just getting the story out on page. And in the olden days, when it was all pen and ink, right? Pencilers worked with inkers. So you had a person whose whole goal was to basically make the line art that the penciler did, clean it up, make it easier to read, but also do it in a way where it's printable black and white, so that the colorist, who obviously puts all the color on the page, right, can put in the colors, right? And then last in line is the letterer, who puts in, all the sound effects, all the dialogue, all that stuff. And then on top of that, there's like post-production that gets the printing taken care of, and graphic design and all that other stuff for the cover. Anyway, listening to you talk about that it's interesting. I think the thing that's really fascinating to me about the filmmaking process is that it's so distinct from what I do, because I do everything sort of by myself. So there's not a whole lot of relationship building, like with my editor, to some extent. But like listening to you talk about that format, like there's a huge amount of relationship building, and like it's just really it's just an interesting process to me, I guess. And really kind of hits at the idea of like what a rehearsal is. Because to me, it's like the closest analogy that I can come up with to rehearsals is the process of just refining what is going to end up on the final like page. But that's a really kind of a different thing, in the sense that I'm almost doing like sculpting, where it's like I'm just kind of making it a little bit better every time.
Yeah.
And you're kind of doing something where it's more like you're almost setting up the garden bed from which everything's going to like spring forth, like you don't really have control ultimately of what the actors are going to do. You just have control of the soil that you're setting up for them to kind of grow out of, basically.
Yeah.
And that is a totally different, I don't know, it's a totally different way of thinking about that part of the creative process to me. Because like I said, it's just like, I think for a long time I haven't been able to relate to the idea of the rehearsal, because in my mind I think of, I just have to get it to this point where I can just repeat it over and over again perfectly. And it's really more like, I'm getting it to this place where I understand the spirit of the material in such a way that regardless of my scenario, I'm always getting some piece of it. If I have to do it multiple times, that's okay. But like, I'm just getting to a place where I'm like able to perform the long jump, so to speak, right? Like that's what practice is in sports, right? Is you're just getting to that point where when competition time comes, you feel confident enough of like, if there's any point at which I'm going to be able to do this long jump, it's this point, because I've worked myself to get to this place, right? So that is like I feel like that answers all my questions for you in regards to rehearsals. And I don't really know if I have necessarily that much more to say on the idea. Do you have any final things that you want to like into that topic?
Yeah, I'll throw out a little bit more for our listeners, and you can stop me if I'm just rambling incoherently. You know, I think rehearsal is the bedrock of which it's almost like the first draft of writing,
Yeah.
right? I most people who try to tell you that they wrote a first draft and it was the draft that ended up getting produced and are full of shit. They're just saying that to try to make themselves come off as some mystical god or something. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like rewrites are where the fucking magic happens. I've said that a million times. Writing is rewriting. Same thing happens when, so like, not to I'm not trying to ruin the movie. Obviously, the number one rule, and I think it was a theater thing, but it was like, do not bring a gun on stage unless you're going to fire it.
Yeah,
right.
it's Nabokov's rule gun or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Something like that.
yeah. Well, okay. So spoiler alert: the gun does get fired in my movie.
Yeah, right.
Whether or not people die or whatever like that, I'm not going to go into. But someone does get shot, right? We need to do blood squibs. We need to have blood squibs. I've never used blood squibs before. I'm currently building them on the table behind me right now. And I'm not going to show up on the set the day of filming and say, well, let's hope this works because it might not. And I need to do it. So like, I'll even adjust the camera for our visual people. There's a little dummy, a mannequin right there in my office. And I use that mannequin for a lot of things. Costume design. I use it to set focus as a stand-in sometimes when I'm filming things. But for this, we're going to be putting blood squibs on him. And we're going to test them weeks in advance and see how it works. See how the blood sprays. If we see that, I mean, when blood sprays, right? Because we're gonna have curtains on set to spray onto or whatever like that, or like a white rug or whatever.
Yeah.
I want to see how that blood sprays first, because not only am I gonna have better idea of how to cover it with the camera, I might change a shot. I might say, oh, this allows us to really do a artistic thing that reflects the theme. All these little practices allow me to save time. And time is what you're fighting against when you are on set. Time is money. And when you're not paying people to be there, do you know what I mean? Like, you need to be really respectful and value their time. I've been on sets that have been poorly run where people have not planned out a thing. Not a thing. I've shown up on sets where they didn't know what we were shooting that day. They didn't have anything worked out. They didn't clean the set. They didn't arrange the set. There wasn't decoration. There wasn't blocking. There wasn't a shot list. There wasn't storyboards. Fucking nothing. And I was volunteering on these particular productions. And I'm thinking to myself, this is time I could have been spending with my son. This is time I could have been trying to make some more money. This is some fucking time I could be using to relax.
Yeah.
That I never do. Like I could literally be just laying there with my son watching a movie right now and be high on life. But I'm wasting it around these people who don't seem to give a shit about what they're doing. They're chasing clout. You know, they just want to take a picture for the gram or all the, you know what I mean? Or they love the ideal of, I'm making a movie or I'm going to be a celebrity. And they think they're, and I posted this today on my Twitter or Facebook and Instagram. I don't believe in fucking talent. I don't. There are people who do the work and people who don't. The people who think, like, if you look at someone and go, oh, that guy's talented. No, fuck you. That guy's put in work. And that's what rehearsal has become on a more focused schedule. Like a great actor, right, can show up and know when a director is giving them a result-oriented directing. And they think to myself, all right, I got to figure this out now. What do I have to do? I have to direct myself in my head. And if they have that experience, they know, all right, I got to do this. I got to do this. I do this, do this, this. Boom. They've rehearsed that. Do you know what I mean? Like on other sets, on other movies, on whatever it may be, the person who's just like, I got to figure this out now hasn't, and they can get lucky or they don't. Most of the time, they don't. And that's what rehearsal really is. So when you look at rehearsal, it's more just like I don't want to call it stylized, but a sectioned off, right, area of practice. Mm-hmm. And that's all that it is. And the more you practice, the better you are at something. So if you have an opportunity, which I do on this particular film, to rehearse, I am going to take it and we're going to do it. and you learn from that and you grow from that. You know what I've learned from this right now? We're shooting a 20-page script in 2.5 days. Insanity, people. This is fucking ludicrous. But what I have learned from this as the executive producer, the blood squibs, the actor schedules, the wardrobe, the makeup, location, lighting, shot list, sound design, all this shit that I'm managing for a 20-page script. I'm ready to throw myself off of a bridge because I'm so behind, and I have over a month before we're even doing stuff, right? It's a month.
Yeah.
I'm so behind, and this is rehearsal right now for this film, right? Doing this work is rehearsal for making Haunted at some point. And I'm looking at this now going, I am insane if I think I can put together Haunted in 2 months, film it in the third month, and No. Like, I got a shit ton of work to do. And I got to start, you know what I mean? Like, I thought getting the script done and, making some movie posters and getting laurels. Fuck all that. I got work to do.
I mean, I like what you're saying, because like every project is a rehearsal for your next project, ultimately.
Exactly.
I definitely feel that in thinking about the next story I want to go into, because I feel like I'm getting to this point where I'm now focusing more on refining the things that I've gotten good at, in like paying attention to the things that I missed in in like the previous project.
Yeah.
And I'm starting from the ground up now with like, I just need to make sure I have a good premise and that the story from beginning to end remains within the frame of that premise and doesn't go bonanza outside of it, but like actually sticks to it in a way where any sort of modifications to the premise doesn't just like it's that resonance idea, basically. Like, I'm trying to think really hard on that and thinking about, okay, and after talking about the spine thing, like, that's now something I'm going to have to think about for every single character. Because
sorry.
No, because it's useful, because like I said, like, I'm not ready yet to really speak on what the premise of the next story is, but like, it is something where it is sort of confined within a very simple theme.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that the characters do, because like I designed these characters from the ground up, right? Almost before I had an idea of what they even really meant in the story.
Yeah.
And that's often the way that I think, because I think very visually. So, I mean, it would almost be like if I were a director and I picked actors, right, to be in a film before I even wrote the script. And like, that's kind of where I am right now, is like, I've kind of picked out the actors and now I'm writing the script for them all to kind of go together in. And in that script writing process, I'm like, oh, okay, I still have to actually think about why the fuck did I pick these actors, right? Like, what is it that they share that goes together so well that would make the story like resonant to people who read it, but also resonant within the story itself. So, like I said, that's something I'm going to be walking away from this conversation with, because it's going to be very much on my mind going forward. Because like I said, like, Trailer Park Warlock was a rehearsal for this next story.
Yep.
And this story will be a rehearsal for whatever comes after. And I think on some level it also sort of can carry off into other forms of media, where you take the ideas that you learned, and I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know what that means in regards to like, how does comics translate to music, right? Like, if I were wanting to make music, like, the main thing that I think would carry over that I've rehearsed so much is the idea of like understanding your time, like your span of time that you're working in, and making the piece work within that span of time. If that makes sense. Like, so you're doing a short story, right? So like, you everything that you do within making this story, you had to block out time in a different way from like a full-length movie. You had to block out.
I had to structure it differently. Absolutely.
Well, you have to block out like how much attention you're giving to your actors too, because like 5 actors, not all of them are going to get the same amount of time, or
Correct.
5 plus, right? Like they're not all going to get the same amount of time, so you have to be very choosy about which ones you're going to really focus on in regards to rehearsals, but also when filming, right? Like you have to kind of think about, all right, well, how much of my resources is going to go to each particular person, and how am I going to block that out ultimately when it comes time to shoot?
It's mostly about what services the story.
Yeah.
What services the theme. You know, there's so not getting too spoileristic and not to keep this going longer than it needs to, but like there are 4 guys and 1 girl, and there are 3 defense monologues from the guys. One of the guys does not get the defense monologue, and it's not a spoiler or anything like that. Like nothing prevents him from giving his monologue, so to speak. It's just the way the story unfolded. So he doesn't have a monologue, right?
Yeah.
And I remember talking to him already about it, and I was like, we need this. You need to understand this differently. Like it is not a slight against your character that they don't get that monologue. It is just an opportunity for us to do something different with that character. That character's a breath of fresh air compared to the others, right? So like what that guy was thinking was like, oh, I don't get a monologue. I don't get the And I've spun him around on that, I think, so far. We'll see how rehearsals go and everything. But where it was very much so like, no. This is an opportunity now. We can do something with this. And just because he's not, and I talked about that exercise about not performing the scene without dialogue, right?
Yeah.
That's where I really want him to shine. I want him to be that character, to say something without dialogue, to really make the audience go, oh, that guy, like we don't have to have that dialogue. So in a sense, I am still giving equal treatment to all of the actors, but what I'm giving what I'm giving focus to is the project. So when the moment calls for me to look at someone and say, I need to work with you on this part right here, everybody else take 5. It's because that's part of the project. Now there's a part without a monologue for him, and I might say to everybody else, take 5. Me and him got to work on this one moment because it may be 3 seconds on screen, but this pivots the entire fucking movie. And you know what I mean? Like it really, it comes down to focusing again on understanding what we're doing as a team and all servicing the project, and not necessarily the egos of myself, the crew, or the actors. We're all there for a reason. And I tell this to them all the time. I'm like, if this fucking movie tanks, you point at me and you say, that's what my director wanted. That's what I gave. And Andrew, that's Andrew's fault. It's his fault. And if this fucking movie rules, right? When it fucking kills, I'm going to turn around and say, I am nothing without all these people. These people made it happen. So I'm willing to stick my neck on the chopping block, take all of the blame, but I'm happy to share all the credit. You know what I'm saying? So it's all about servicing that project. And I don't want them concerned about that kind of thing to it. I don't know. You didn't even ask a question, but I don't know if I really made my point.
No, that's a good point to make, though.
All right, so we're wrapping up. Everybody stay tuned. I don't know, me and Mr. Rainwater are going to talk when we get off the air about what's going on with next week, because we're coming up on Thanksgiving quick.
Yeah.
And then the week after Thanksgiving is when I'm shooting my film. So needless to say, I've ranted this entire hour about how much work that I have to do. I don't know if we'll have another episode, but I will say we have something very fun planned for our Christmas season. And I also thought of a second fun thing for an episode to do during our Christmas season. And I've already forgotten what it is. And if I remember, I'm going to tell Rainwater. But we have at least one awesome thing planned, and possibly 2. So don't go anywhere. We're going to have some cool stuff coming up. And And once my film is done, I know we're gonna have a talk about it. We're gonna definitely go do a deep dive. Probably have some of the actors or the crew on to interview them and get their experiences on it. I'm very excited to talk to Rainwater about concluding Trailer Park Warlock and also kind of pulling out of him what may be in the works for next, whether it's webtoons or music or something on the other nature of that. And I think we are going to get back to getting some of our guests back in, because me and Rainwater are great discussionists, but I think we do even better when we have more people on to bounce off of. So I could tell you guys to look forward to that. But what I will say is that we are coming up in the middle of November, and that's almost our anniversary. We're pretty much kicking off season 3 at the beginning of December, which is insane to say that we have done that many episodes. My wife looked at me today and she goes, because I was talking about, I got to get back from the do the podcast because we were at my parents' house. And she goes, do you guys really have something to talk about every week? I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, you're just talking about art. Like, how do you talk that much about art? Is there a different subject every? I'm like, yeah, I don't think we've maybe repeated 2 topics out of our near 100 episodes. Like it, you know what I mean?
There's
like
gotta be some amount of repetition.
Sure.
But it's modifications on a theme.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think we're that boring. Do you? I hope not.
I thought this was a really interesting conversation for me because, like I said, I learned a lot about that process, and it was something I really didn't know that much about to begin with.
I'm happy I could illuminate you. And you know something? Here's the thing. After I get done with rehearsals, and more importantly, when I get done with the film, I'll probably have new things to say on the subject of directing and producing, because I'm going to learn something on this. There's mistakes that are going to be made that I don't see right now, and I won't see them until I have to handle them, and I'll see how I handle them, and then I'll see how the handling worked out, and then I'll be able to look back on it with hindsight and say that was right, or I should have done this, or I could have done this, or whatever. Yeah. And that's the process, man. That is rehearsal. And like you pointed out, Rainwater, this is just rehearsal for the next project, and the project after that, and the project after that, and the project after that. So get out there and rehearse, people. I don't care what you're doing. Rehearse, practice, fail, start over, rewrite, whatever it's got to be.
Yeah.
But that's how you're going to get better as an artist. Not necessarily make your art better, like that particular project, but the next project will be better. Yep. If you learn from your mistakes and you learn from the failures and the practices and stuff. So I won't rant. Rainwater, you got anything else?
No, that's all I got.
We're done. Peace.
Later, y'all.